Hey everyone, welcome to the demo launch. This is going to be fun. We're going to be diving into consortium data in Unit 21. And that's a pretty critical part of our mission going forward, through time, really, right? Like because the core mission statement of Unit 21 is that we stop bad actors to deliver justice and safety to the world. Really, that's really what drives everybody here. That's really what we're trying to do with pretty much anything we work on, anything we build, anything we talk about, any content we put out there, all of that. I'm really, really glad that you all are tuning into this demo. Very excited to have all of you. But want to jump really quickly into my piece, which is the Fraud Consortium. Before getting into specifics on the consortium, want to focus really quickly on something, which is what is Unit 21, right? And I think every single time I'm asked this question, what I keep going back to is Unit 21 is a platform that allows you to control your controls. Weird sentence, might seem odd, might not seem like it's making a lot of sense. But really, if you think about it, the core mission of our application is human in the loop, machine assisted investigations, right? So what does that mean? That basically means that provided that you bring in all of the data that you need, whether that is your first party data, data generated in your platform, data related to your customers, or third party data, data from vendors, data from government data, all of these different sources that you gather, all of that can be inputted into Unit 21, and you can then build controls for your customers from a risk and fraud perspective. That's really what we pride ourselves on, and that's really what we've built out. So my name is Dheeraj. I run the Fraud Consortium at Unit 21. Again, very, very glad that all of you are here. Really glad to share a little bit more about what we've built out. So before really diving into the consortium, I want to bring you back to this. I'm sure a number of you have seen this before, in general, have a model of this in your heads at some stage. So I talked about this a few minutes ago, but really what Unit 21 is a place where all of this data, whether that is first-party information from your side, third-party information from a vendor, all these different, insights, lifecycle insights that you get. It could even be analytics information from like how are they interacting with your application. All of that information can be piped into Unit 21. And really the data layer that we bring in, or the unique data source that we bring in, is our consortium, right? And I want to dive a little bit into the consortium. Before that, obviously, everybody of you here is familiar with the three things we offer, which is transaction monitoring, the ability to have graph-based insights against your customers, build that linkage between customer A and customer B, who is paying whom, all of that context, and then case management, which is really the investigative wing of this product. And today, our demo is actually going to be touching on a majority of these things. And so you'll see this becoming more and more familiar as time passes on. Again, would love to hear and get questions, feedback, thoughts, concerns from all of you, because that's really the goal here. It's not for me to just provide a demo and wait on what happens. It's more to see. But going back to the Fraud Consortium, in late 2022, we decided that it was time to actually embed network powered data or consortium powered data into Unit 21, right? That was a problem statement. We didn't know how, we didn't know what it would look like. But when we started doing some industry surveys and like chatting with customers and all these different people in our general wider network, what we saw was there was three things to note. The first thing is to get access to consortium data is actually quite tedious. It actually takes a lot of work. So the most successful one in our time is early warning, right? And they're built by, for, and with banks at the core of everything they do. So it's very much a great consortium and a great network, but catering to only regulated FIs. So we saw a small gap there. The second thing that we saw is consortiums and acquiring data from consortiums can be a very, very expensive process. Obviously, something that we think should not be the case. It should be something that is everybody should have access to this. It should be almost like a basic part of your workflow. That's our opinion, right? And then the second thing that we saw is we always talk to people in fraud and risk. All of you are people in fraud and risk. So we love talking to people of that persona. But every single time we talk to these people, what we kept hearing was I love it as a risk person. I love consortiums. I love sharing data. I love telling other people that there's a fraudster in my network or there's a fraud ring that's active. But what about privacy? What about security? And that always came up. That was always a very natural question that we kept seeing. And the third thing we saw was that, and we continue to see actually, is that in the space, all of the data providers or all of the sources or all of the platforms provide risk scores that are very static. And scores are generally the output that you get from these, right? So, and with respect to how and why they're static, it's often very hard to understand what drives that score. Is it an internal ML model? Is there upstream data coming from other providers? Is it some sort of other, computation or algorithm that's running? No one ever knows. The second reason it's challenging is that it doesn't translate well. So for instance, an 8 on 10 risk score for one company may not be exactly an 8 on 10 risk score for another. So if you look at our customer base, we serve, banks and credit unions, we serve crypto exchanges, we serve crypto companies, we serve lending platforms, all of these different companies. And what we've seen and heard a lot of is that these scores don't translate well across these companies. And really what we're doing to solve for each of these is our platform is completely free. And really the only barrier to entry to Unit21’s consortium is that you have to be a contributing member. Anybody that shares data with this consortium gets access to its insights at no cost. The second thing is, if you're familiar with privacy technology and what privacy lawyers are often looking for, we incorporate privacy by design. What we mean by that is when we tried to bring in consortium data and heard a lot of this feedback, what we started thinking about is where else is privacy important? And the first thing that came up, the first thing that will come up if you Google this will always be healthcare. And if there's one industry where personal data is treated to be more sensitive than even the financial services, then it's 100% it's healthcare. So within the healthcare industry, they have this way where they hash sensitive information before sharing it with other providers. That's exactly the concept that we've brought in into the financial services space. We've obviously added a lot of technology, a lot of computation, a lot of normalization factors and things like that on top of it. Pleased to say it is patent pending on our side. So it's very, very interesting technology. That is probably a 2-hour conversation in and of itself. But privacy is pretty much baked into our platform. We hash all sensitive PII before ingesting it, which means we are probably the only consortium that I know of that does not ingest PII into its database. The last thing, perhaps the most important, is that we don't actually provide a score today at all. What we give you instead is a holistic picture of your customer. What I mean by a holistic picture of your customer is whenever you're doing an investigation of a person's account, whether that is for fraud reasons or just general investigations, you will always look at a specific subset of information within their account, right? So you might see some of the personal information that that person has sent you, or rather that you have aggregated about that person, right? So it could be their name, their social, their date of birth, all of this PII or their personal information to build that identity, so to speak. And then the other thing you might look at is their recent transactions. Have they made large withdrawals, large deposits? Have they done anything interesting or should we say funky within their account? You'll also look at things like login times, login activity, maybe IP addresses, right? So this person lives in San Francisco. Why are we suddenly seeing logins from Rwanda at a weird hour in the night, right? So all of that, all of those data points is something that you see. Now, picture having that exact same data across multiple different partners or multiple different people in your community. This is not a product that is built, to kill competition or anything like that. This is a product that fosters community by sharing insights about customers. So I'd love to show you a little bit more about that as the demo goes through as well. And then I want to focus a little bit on some of the early things we're seeing or some of the early wins that we have. We're seeing that the consortium today is primarily seeing and able to prevent the proliferation of scams. We're seeing unfortunately, a lot of elder scams and romance scams happening in our platform, sometimes sort of overlapping as well. We are seeing that our members are reporting these sorts of activity to our platform every single day. We have 53 members that are live today. We're seeing about, I think, 5,500 or so accounts that have been blocked since this consortium has launched among these members. we're seeing a couple hundred people every couple of weeks being blocked solely because of consortium and solely because they've been known to be a fraudster in the past. They've been known to be a bad actor by this consortium and through this consortium. So really pleased to see some of the traction. Also, not very pleased to see some of the fraud patterns that we're looking at every day. I already talked about one unique aspect about our consortium, which is that we have this system where maybe our database is really the only one that doesn't ingest PII due to all of the protection that we do, all of the hashing that we do, and all of that. But really, the second unique thing that I think is part of our consortium is not only do we allow you to supply labels about bad actors and labels about suspicious activity. You might be seeing some stuff on the right-hand side here, but we also allow you to tell us when someone has clearly been defrauded. Whenever the fraud occurs, there are actually two sides to that story, right? There's always a perpetrator and there's always a victim. The victim may be an ODFI, an RDFI, or a fintech, but it could also be an individual person. In cases where it's an individual person, oftentimes those people can get then declined on financial services. Those people can get denied on financial services because their profile shows up as suspicious or their profile shows up as having been part of a scam or being part of fraud, right? So we want to make that a little bit more granular and provide context on who's a victim and who's a perpetrator, just to make sure that these customers are not excluded and these customers get value in their life cycle over time. So today, the focus really is scams and first-party fraud. But going forward, one of the things we're looking to add is the ability to screen payment destinations against a consortium as well. So today we have this concept of an identity consortium where you can check and query your customers against this data source. Tomorrow, we're also going to have a consortium where potentially you can check these people's payment destinations or payment accounts to see if it's been associated with bad activity. So maybe someone says they're Dheeraj, but they're associated with a bank account that's clearly been part of many bad wires and those sorts of things. Obviously does exist to some extent in the industry, but we want to take that further and bring it to potentially, counterparty risk screening and those sorts of use cases. Would love to get your thoughts, feedback on these ideas as well. Really quickly, also want to pull your attention to the right-hand side here that I'm looking at, which is the scams, the elder fraud, the victims. These are our top three labels. So it does play very closely into what I was talking about a little earlier. All right, boring stuff's over. Time for demo. Okay, so going back to my definition of Unit 21, you control your controls, you build your workflows according to what you require, you build your workflows according to what is relevant to you, what data you've sent into the platform, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What does that mean? In one word, that means one thing: rules. Right? So rules are really the heart and soul of our system and heart and soul of everything we're doing, regardless of the product, regardless of the use case, and regardless of what type of fraud you're seeing. So you'll see a lot of different things that you may have seen before and may not have seen before. So for instance, if there's any new features, you'll see the new tag. So you have check fraud, which is a big part of some of the things we've solved for this year. You'll see some rules specifically cater to that. Closer to home, if we talk about the Fraud Consortium, most of you would probably have this question in your mind by now, which is like, you talked a lot about this. You talked a lot about the privacy. You've talked a lot about the data. You've talked a lot about how you don't have scores. You have holistic data. What am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to leverage it? So there is no concept of, for instance, going one-to-one, looking for a particular customer, looking at whether they've been bad in the past, doing that, multiple clicks, multiple windows, all of that painful investigation process. Instead, we've actually automated it. And the way we've automated it is just like we automate everything else, which is essentially rules. So there's actually two rules that we've built out, and I'd like to talk a little bit about both of them. The first one looks at the recency of your customers sign up, which means they look at new accounts or new people that have signed up to your platform. So people that have signed up to your platform within the last day or within the last week can be screened against a consortium, and they can be screened against a consortium looking at specific labels. So, maybe you care a lot about friendly fraud that's happening in your platform. Maybe you care a lot about, check fraud at that moment. Maybe you care a lot about scams. We offer this ability to multi-select the exact model or the exact risk play that you're looking at. We also offer what is called a multi-select or an all-select, which is any. So most customers actually start off with this as they start to build and think about building that muscle of how do I consume data from the consortium and so on. So if you start with any, what you'll get is no matter what the label is, no matter what the reason is, even if there isn't a reason that's been supplied, you'll get to know when a consortium member is closing an account because potentially that person is a fraudster or potentially this person has suspicious things going on, right? You'll get to know. You'll get an alert in your regular workflow, which I'll also share a little bit about. Quickly going to jump into the second rule. The second rule is actually kind of the inverse of the first one, where the first one you were looking at the recency of the signup, and in this case, you're looking at the recency of the consortium data. So there could be really a customer that's 4 years old, 5 years old in your platform who has, for all intents and purposes, been a normal customer, been a regular transactor, so on and so forth. But suddenly you're seeing odd behavior, or suddenly you're seeing bust out activity, suddenly you're seeing account takeover happening against their account. You'd like to know about that. So this really encompasses that real workflow. So instance, this will screen all of your customers across all time against the most recent consortium data. It will check whether your existing customers, whether they're signed up yesterday, whether they signed up 2 years ago, whether they've been flagged in the last week in this instance, or maybe in the last day if you want to go that way. And they have we have the exact same filters against that data. So we have, promotion abuses, card scams, elder abuse, fraud victims, so on and so forth. So you want to know if any of your customers have been victims, maybe, right? You want to know if your customers have been part of any check fraud or social scams or anything like that. So any, again, is our default option, which gives you kind of a select all. Before we roll off, I want to give you a quick sneak peek into what the investigation process looks like, because we talked about 2-3 things today, right? Like we talked about human in the loop, machine assisted investigations. We talked about rules and how they're the heart and soul of everything we do. We're now going to see when you get consortium data, what do you do with it? How do you use it in your investigations? So going to open up this alert really, really quickly. You have this hypothetical user called Dylan, who has been flagged by a consortium rule, and it looks like they've been flagged for ACH fraud. What does that mean? The alert for the consortium rule will be exactly the same as what you see all the time, regardless of the types of data you're looking at. The only change, or the only big change, is this concept of consortium hits. Now, consortium hits are basically the responses from the consortium against that person. In this instance, Dylan is a customer of 2 other organizations that are in the consortium, one of whom have deemed him bad enough to block. The other of them have not blocked this person, right? So one of them is a payments platform and the other one's a crypto platform. With that said, the payments platform believe that this person was part of ACH fraud, likely that they're the perpetrator. That's why they've blocked them with the label ACH fraud. And there's also a transactional amount associated with it. So they also supplied information which Unit21 aggregated for them on what financial exposure they had against that business. So imagine this now had 6, 7, 8 different members contributing the data. How much value and how much context you could get out of this data. So really, this is how you automate your investigation process using the consortium. I really hope you've enjoyed this demo. This has been amazing fun to work on for the past 2 years. I'm really excited to see where we go next. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for joining our demo showcase. There are 11 more Unit 21 demos you can dive into while attending Fraud Fighters Virtual Summit today. So please do so. Alternatively, if you're ready to learn more about Unit 21 from one of our fraud and AML practitioners, you can simply scan the QR code on the left and request a personalized demo. And last but not least, I'm excited to share that we are in the midst of data gathering for our 3rd annual State of Fraud and AML report. We're seeking to make this research the most informative findings yet, but we're unable to uncover and publish these insights without your contribution. Scan the QR code on the right to fill out the survey. It'll take no more than 10 minutes and it'll uncover invaluable industry trends and insights so we can all better combat risk and compliance together. Thanks so much for contributing to our research.